My name is Ava Carter, and I'm 27 years old. What I'm about to share isn't just a story. It's the truth that changed my life forever. Last Thanksgiving, I walked into my family's house thinking I was finally going to fix everything. I thought maybe, after years of distance, we could sit together, laugh, and feel like a real family again. But that night, everything went terribly wrong. Thanksgiving always used to mean noise, warmth, and the kind of comfort that made you forget everything outside the front door. That's what I kept telling myself as I stood in the driveway staring at the house I hadn't entered in 3 years. The porch light glowed softly, just like it always had, and for a moment, it felt like nothing had changed. But deep down, I knew better. People don't just fix broken relationships overnight. Still, when my brother Daniel called me a week earlier and said, "Let's fix everything," I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. The air was cold enough to make my breath visible, and I rubbed my hands together, trying to calm the nervous energy running through me. I had spent days thinking about this moment, what I would say, how I would act, whether I should bring up the past or leave it buried. In the end, I decided to keep things simple. Smile, be polite, and don't give anyone a reason to push me away again. When I finally rang the doorbell, it only took a few seconds before the door opened. Daniel stood there, smiling like nothing had ever gone wrong between us. He stepped forward and hugged me, and for a split second, I felt like I had my brother back. The same brother who used to defend me in school, who taught me how to drive, who once promised that no matter what happened, we'd always have each other's backs. "Glad you came," he said, his voice warm and steady. "Me too," I replied, even though part of me wasn't sure if that was true yet. As I walked inside, the smell of roasted turkey and spices wrapped around me like a memory. I didn't realize I missed so much. The living room looked exactly the same couch, the same old clock ticking on the wall, the same framed family photos that told a story of happier times. My parents were already at the dining table, and when they saw me, their reactions were controlled. Not cold, but not exactly welcoming either. My mother gave me a small smile, the kind people give when they don't know what else to do. My father simply nodded. "Sit down," my mother said, gesturing toward the table. I took a seat, trying not to overthink every glance, every pause, every word. My sister Emily sat across from me, quietly scrolling through her phone before finally looking up and offering a quick, awkward smile. It felt like I had walked into a room full of strangers who just happened to know my name. Dinner started slowly. At first, it was just small talk, weather, work, random things that didn't matter. Daniel kept the conversation going, almost like he was trying too hard to make everything feel normal. He asked me about my job, about where I was living now, about things he probably already knew but wanted to hear from me anyway. I answered carefully, choosing my words like they were fragile. For a brief moment, I let myself relax. Maybe this could work. Maybe we could move past everything that happened before. Maybe this dinner was exactly what we needed. Then came the laughter. My father told an old joke, the kind he had repeated every Thanksgiving for years, and somehow everyone laughed at the same time. Even me. And in that moment, it felt real. It felt like family. But something was off. I couldn't explain it at first, but there was a tension underneath everything, like a quiet hum waiting to turn into something louder. Daniel kept glancing at me in a way that didn't match his smile. My mother avoided looking directly at me for too long. My sister stayed unusually quiet. It was subtle, but it was there. I tried to ignore it. I focused on my plate, on the food, on anything that would keep my thoughts from spiraling. But the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it grew stronger with every passing minute. At one point, Daniel stood up and walked into the other room. I watched him go, my chest tightening slightly, though I didn't know why. When he came back, he was holding something in his hands. A folder. Plain, simple, nothing special about it. But the way he held it made my stomach drop. He didn't say anything right away. He just walked back to his seat, placed the folder on the table, and looked directly at me. The room fell quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't feel natural. "What's that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowly pushed the folder toward me. Everyone else at the table was watching now, their eyes fixed on me like they were waiting for something. "Open it," he said. My hands felt colder as I reached for it. I hadn't even opened it yet, but something inside me already knew this wasn't going to be good. Whatever hope I had walked in with, whatever belief that this dinner was about fixing things, it started to slip away. I looked around the table one last time, hoping to find some kind of reassurance, some sign that I was overthinking it. But there was nothing, just silence. Just eyes watching me, waiting. Slowly, I opened the folder. The moment I opened the folder, the air in the room seemed to change. My eyes moved slowly across the first page, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Numbers. Dates. Transaction records. At first, it didn't click. It just looked like paperwork, complicated, official, and completely out of place at a family dinner. But then I saw the number clearly printed in bold, $78,000. My heart skipped, and I blinked, thinking maybe I had misunderstood. But as I flipped to the next page, the same number appeared again, this time connected to my name. My full name. A strange pressure built in my chest as I looked up at Daniel. He wasn't smiling anymore. His face was serious, almost cold, like he had been waiting for this exact moment. "What is this?" I asked, my voice quieter than I expected. Daniel leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "You know exactly what it is." I shook my head immediately. "No, I don't." Iprum dies. The silence around the table grew heavier. I could feel everyone watching me, but no one spoke. My father's expression had hardened, and my mother looked nervous, like she didn't want to be part of this but wasn't going to stop it either. "It's the missing money," Daniel said finally. "From the business." The words hit me like a shock. "What?" "The $78,000 that disappeared," he continued, his tone steady, controlled. "It went through an account connected to you." "That's not possible," I said quickly, the confusion in my voice turning into panic. "I didn't take anything." Daniel leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked on mine. "Then explain this." He tapped the papers in front of me, and I felt my hands start to shake. I looked back down, scanning the documents more carefully this time. There were transaction logs, signatures, even what looked like authorization forms. And somehow, all of it pointed to me. But it didn't make sense. I made an investment," I said, trying to piece the memory together. "You approved it, Daniel. You told me to move the money. You said it was for expansion." The moment the words left my mouth, I knew something was wrong. Daniel's expression didn't change. If anything, it became even more distant. "I never approved anything like that," he said flatly. My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about? You signed the papers." "You told me yourself." "I think you're confused," he interrupted, cutting me off without raising his voice. "I'm not confused," I snapped, louder now. "You were there. You said it was urgent, that we needed to act fast." "That's enough," my father's voice broke through, sharp and firm. I turned to him, my chest tightening. "Dad, you have to believe me. I wouldn't just take money like that." He didn't respond right away. He looked at the documents, then at Daniel, and then back at me. The disappointment in his eyes hurt more than anything Daniel had said. "All the evidence is right here," he said slowly. "Your name, your authorization, the transfer records." "Because he told me to do it." I pointed at Daniel, my voice shaking with frustration. "Why would I do something like that on my own?" Daniel let out a small, humorless laugh. "Maybe you needed the money." I stared at him, unable to process what he had just said. "Are you serious right now? You've been gone for years," he continued. "No one really knows what you've been doing. Maybe things didn't work out the way you planned." "That's not true," I said, my voice breaking slightly. You know that's not true. But he didn't respond. He just looked at me like I was someone he didn't recognize. I turned to my mother, hoping no, expecting her to say something. To defend me. To at least question what was happening. But she just sat there, her hands tightly clasped together, her eyes filled with uncertainty. Mom, I said softly. She hesitated, then looked down at the table. Ava, if there's something you need to explain, this is the time. The words felt like a knife. Not because of what she said, but because of what she didn't say. She didn't say she believed me. She didn't say she believed me. She didn't say this was a mistake. She didn't say anything that would help. I am explaining, I said, my voice rising again. I didn't steal anything. I did what Daniel told me to do. My sister finally spoke, her voice quiet but clear. But why would he lie? I looked at her, stunned. Why would I? No one answered. The silence that followed was unbearable. It wasn't just quiet. It was judgment, doubt, and something worse, distance. I could feel it growing between me and everyone else at that table, like an invisible wall going up piece by piece. I trusted you, I said, looking directly at Daniel now. I trusted you when you asked me to handle that transfer. You said it was important. And I'm telling you now, he replied calmly, that I never did. It was like talking to a completely different person. There was no hesitation, no guilt, no sign that he was lying. And that made it even worse. I looked back down at the papers, trying to find something, anything, that could prove I was right. But all I saw was my name, over and over again, tied to something I didn't do. How could this even happen? I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. But deep down, a thought started to form. A quiet, terrifying possibility that I didn't want to believe. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was planned. I slowly looked up again, my eyes meeting Daniel's. And in that moment, something in his expression confirmed what I was afraid of. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it was there. He wasn't confused. He wasn't mistaken. He knew exactly what he was doing. I kept staring at Daniel, waiting for something to crack. A blink, a shift in his voice, any sign that this was all some kind of misunderstanding that could still be fixed. But nothing came. His face remained calm, controlled, almost rehearsed. It didn't feel like we were having a family argument anymore. It felt like I was being questioned in a place where the outcome had already been decided. This doesn't make sense, I said, forcing myself to stay steady even though everything inside me was shaking. You were the one who told me to move the money. You sent me the details. You said it was time sensitive. Daniel didn't even hesitate. I never sent you anything like that. That's a lie, I shot back, louder now. I still remember the call. You said we couldn't wait, that the business needed it immediately. My father's hand hit the table lightly, not enough to make a loud noise, but enough to silence me for a second. Lower your voice, he said firmly. This isn't how we handle things. I swallowed hard, trying to control the anger rising in my chest. Then how do we handle this? Because I'm being accused of something I didn't do. My father looked at Daniel again, then back at me. Your brother has no reason to lie. The words landed heavily. And I do? I asked, my voice almost breaking. No one answered. That silence said everything. I turned back to the folder, flipping through the pages more quickly now, searching for anything that could prove my side. That's when I saw it, an authorization form with a signature that looked like mine. At first glance, it was perfect. Too perfect. That's not my signature, I said, pointing at it. It matches your records, Daniel replied calmly. It looks like mine, but it's not, I insisted. You can't seriously expect me to believe this is real. My sister leaned forward slightly, studying the paper. It does look like yours, she said quietly. I shook my head, frustration building. Of course it does. That's the point. Someone copied it. Who would do that? She asked. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I slowly looked at Daniel. The room seemed to freeze for a moment. "You think I did this?" he said, raising an eyebrow, almost amused. "I don't know what to think anymore," I replied, my voice tight. "But I know I didn't take that money." Daniel leaned back again, exhaling as if he was tired of the conversation. "This is exactly what I was afraid of." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means you're not taking responsibility," he said. "You're trying to turn this into something else instead of admitting what you did." "I didn't do anything," I said firmly. "You're the one changing the story." My mother finally spoke again, her voice soft but tense. "Ava, if there's something you're not telling us," I stared at her, disbelief washing over me. "There isn't anything. I've told you everything." "But the evidence," she said, glancing at the papers. "The evidence is wrong," I interrupted. "Can't you see that?" But they couldn't. Or maybe they didn't want to. I could feel it slipping away now. Any chance of them believing me? Every word I said seemed to push them further in the opposite direction, like I was digging myself deeper without even realizing it. "You always had access to the accounts," Daniel continued, his tone steady and convincing. "You handled transfers before. No one questioned it." "Because I was doing my job," I said. "Because you trusted me." "I did trust you," he replied. "That's what makes this worse." The way he said it made something twist inside me. He sounded disappointed, not angry. Like I had let him down. And that was what made his lie so dangerous, it sounded believable. "I didn't betray you," I said quietly. "You're betraying me right now." He didn't respond to that. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable. I turned to my father again, desperation creeping into my voice. "You've known me my whole life. Do you really think I would steal from our own business?" He hesitated. Just for a second. But I saw it. And then it was gone. "I think," he said slowly, "that people can change." That was it. That was the moment something inside me broke. Not loudly, not all at once, but enough to know that nothing I said was going to fix this. I leaned back in my chair, my hands falling into my lap. The fight drained out of me, replaced by something colder. Something heavier. They had already made up their minds. This wasn't a discussion. It wasn't about finding the truth. It was about confirming a story they had already chosen to believe. I looked at each of them one by one, my father, my mother, my sister, and realized something I hadn't wanted to admit before. They weren't on my side. Maybe they never were. And Daniel knew that. That's why he could sit there so calmly, so confidently, knowing that no matter what I said, it wouldn't be enough. Because he didn't just build a lie. He built it in a way that made me look guilty, and him look like the victim. The silence after my father's last words felt heavier than anything that had been said before. It wasn't just quiet. It was final. I could feel it settling into the room, into their expressions, and to the way no one was looking at me the same anymore. Just minutes ago, I had walked in hoping to fix things. Now, I was sitting there realizing I had already lost. My chest felt tight, like the air had become too thick to breathe properly. I looked around the table one more time, hoping that someone would say something different, that someone would question Daniel, or at least hesitate before accepting all of this as truth. But no one did. Instead, my father slowly pushed his chair back and stood up. The sound of the legs scraping against the floor echoed louder than it should have. Everyone's attention shifted to him immediately, including mine. "If you won't return the money," he said, his voice calm but firm, "then you're not welcome here." For a moment, I thought I had heard him wrong. The words didn't register right away. They just hung there, suspended in the air like something unreal. "What?" I whispered. "You heard me," he replied, his tone unchanged. "We can't have someone in this house who steals from the family." The word steals hit harder than anything else. It wasn't just an accusation anymore. It was a label, a decision, a conclusion they had already accepted. "I didn't steal anything," I said, my voice trembling despite my effort to stay steady. "How many times do I have to say it?" My father didn't respond. He just looked at me with a kind of disappointment that felt worse than anger. Please, I said, turning to my mother now. You know me. You know I wouldn't do something like this. She looked torn, her eyes moving between me and the papers on the table. For a second, I thought she might say something in my defense. But then she lowered her gaze again. We just want this resolved, she said quietly. If there's a misunderstanding, you need to fix it. I'm trying to fix it, I replied, frustration rising again. But no one is listening to me. Daniel let out a small sigh, like this whole situation was exhausting him. Ava, this isn't about listening. It's about facts. The money is gone, and everything points to you. Because you made it point to me, I snapped, standing up now. You're lying, and you know it. His expression hardened slightly, but he didn't lose his composure. I'm not going to argue with you. Of course you're not, I said bitterly, because you've already convinced everyone. My sister shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Maybe you should just give the money back, she said hesitantly. If you can, I mean, just to fix things. I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. You think I have $78,000 just sitting somewhere? I don't know, she replied quickly. I'm just saying, maybe there's a way to make this right. There is no making it right, because I didn't do anything wrong, I said, my voice rising again. That's enough, my father said sharply. This conversation is over. The finality in his voice sent a chill through me. He wasn't interested in hearing anything else. He had already made his decision and nothing I said was going to change it. You need to leave, he added. The words landed like a physical blow. Are you serious? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper now. Yes, he said. Until this is resolved, you are not welcome here. I looked at Daniel, hoping for some sign that he would stop this, that he would say it had gone too far. But he just sat there, watching me, his expression unreadable. You're really going to let this happen? I asked him. He didn't answer. That silence told me everything. I let out a shaky breath, my hands clenching at my sides. For a moment, I thought about arguing more, about refusing to leave, about forcing them to hear me out. But looking at their faces, I knew it wouldn't matter. They had already chosen what to believe. So instead, I nodded slowly. Fine, I said, my voice quieter now, but steadier. If that's what you want. No one stopped me as I turned toward the door. No one called my name. No one tried to fix what was happening. The same house that had once felt like home now felt cold, distant, and completely unfamiliar. I grabbed my coat, my fingers fumbling slightly as I put it on. My heart was pounding, but not from fear anymore. From something else. Something deeper. Something heavier. I paused at the door for just a second, my hand resting on the handle. Part of me wanted to turn back, to say one last thing, to make them understand. But I knew it would be pointless. So I opened the door and stepped outside. The cold hit me immediately, sharp and unforgiving. The warmth of the house disappeared behind me as the door closed with a quiet but final click. I stood there for a moment, staring into the darkness of the street. My breath came out in uneven bursts, and I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to hold it together. Thanksgiving, a night that was supposed to be about family, about togetherness, about forgiveness. And yet, here I was alone, accused and thrown out like I didn't belong there at all. I walked slowly to my car, each step feeling heavier than the last. My mind was racing, replaying everything that had just happened, every word, every look, every moment that led to this. As I reached the car, I stopped and looked back at the house one last time. The lights were still on. From the outside, it looked warm, normal, unchanged. But I knew the truth. Everything had changed. And as I stood there, one realization settled in. Clear and undeniable. This wasn't just betrayal. It was something far more deliberate. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time before even turning the key. The cold from outside had followed me in, Or maybe it wasn't the cold at all. Maybe it was the silence. The kind that presses against your ears and forces you to hear every thought you're trying to avoid. My hands rested on the steering wheel, still slightly shaking, and I kept staring at the house in front of me like something might change if I waited long enough. But nothing did. No one came outside. No one came outside. No one called my phone. No one tried to stop me from leaving. It was as if I had already been erased from their lives the moment I stepped out that door. I finally exhaled slowly and leaned back in my seat, closing my eyes for a second. The entire night replayed in my mind, but this time, I wasn't reacting to it emotionally. I was analyzing it, breaking it down piece by piece. Something wasn't right. At first, it had all felt like shock-like. Everything happened too fast to process. But now, sitting alone, away from their voices and their stares, I could think clearly. And the more I thought about it, the more it didn't feel like a misunderstanding. It felt planned. I opened my eyes again and stared at the dashboard, my thoughts starting to connect in ways they hadn't before. Daniel's call a week ago suddenly felt different. "Let's fix everything," he had said. At the time, it sounded like an attempt to rebuild. Now, it sounded like bait. Why invite me after 3 years just to accuse me? That question sat heavy in my mind. Then there was the folder. The documents were ready, organized, detailed. That wasn't something you throw together in a few hours. It meant preparation. It meant timing. And it meant intention. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel slightly as another thought hit me. The investment. I remembered it clearly now. The conversation, the urgency in Daniel's voice, the way he insisted it needed to be done quickly. At the time, it didn't feel strange. We had handled large transactions before. It was part of the business. But now, looking back, something about it felt off. Too urgent. Too convenient. "I need you to handle this," he had said. "I trust you." The words echoed in my mind, but now they felt hollow. Twisted. My heart started to beat faster. Not from panic this time, but from realization. If he had asked me to move that money, and now he was denying it, then there were only 2 possibilities. Either I was losing my memory, or he was lying. And I knew which one made more sense. I let out a quiet breath, my mind sharpening as I followed that line of thought further. The signature on the document, it looked like mine. But something about it felt too perfect. Almost like it had been copied instead of written naturally. And the way Daniel spoke tonight, it wasn't defensive. It wasn't confused. It was controlled. Confident. Like he already knew how everything would play out. That wasn't the behavior of someone trying to figure out what happened. That was the behavior of someone who already knew. A chill ran through me. But it wasn't from the weather. It was from the realization settling deeper into my mind. He didn't just accuse me, he set me up. I sat there, letting that truth sink in. It didn't come all at once. It built slowly, piece by piece, until it became impossible to ignore. Every detail from tonight started to make sense in a way it hadn't before. The invitation. The timing. The documents. The confidence in his voice. None of it was random. It was all part of something bigger. I leaned forward slightly, resting my forehead against the steering wheel for a moment, as I tried to process it all. My chest felt tight again, but this time it wasn't just pain. It was something else, something sharper. Betrayal was one thing. That hurt, but it was simple. You expect it from people sometimes, but this was calculated, planned, executed in a way that left me with no way to defend myself in that moment. He didn't just want to accuse me. He wanted everyone else to believe it too. And the worst part? It worked. I could still see their faces. My father's disappointment, my mother's doubt, my sister's hesitation. None of them questioned him. Not really. They just accepted what was in front of them. Because it was easier. Because the evidence looked real. Because Daniel made sure it would. I slowly lifted my head, my eyes focusing again as a new thought began to form. If he went through all this effort to set me up, then why? What did he gain from it? Money? Maybe. But that didn't feel like the full answer. There was something else. Something deeper. Control. If I was out of the picture, if I was blamed, removed, cut off, then everything would fall into his hands. The business. The decisions. The power. And no one would question him. Because I would be the problem. I sat back again, this time with a different kind of stillness. The confusion was fading, replaced by clarity. And with that clarity came something I hadn't felt earlier. Focus. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't mistaken. I was targeted. And if that was true, then somewhere out there, there had to be proof. Real proof. Not the kind he created, but the kind he couldn't control. Emails. Records. Something. Because no matter how carefully he planned this, no plan was perfect. There were always cracks, and if I looked closely enough, I would find them. The engine finally started, but I didn't drive right away. The soft hum of the car filled the silence, giving my thoughts something steady to hold on to. A few minutes ago, I had been overwhelmed, hurt, and confused. Now, something inside me had shifted. The pain was still there, but it was no longer controlling me. It had changed into something quieter, sharper, more focused. I looked at my phone sitting in the passenger seat. No missed calls, no messages, nothing. It was almost strange how quickly everything had gone silent. After everything that happened inside that house, it was like I didn't exist anymore. For a brief moment, the thought crossed my mind to call my mother, just to hear her voice, just to ask her one more time to believe me. But I stopped myself. I already knew how that conversation would go. She wouldn't have answers. She wouldn't go against my father or Daniel, and I couldn't afford to sound desperate anymore. Desperation was exactly what Daniel expected from me. I picked up my phone, unlocked it, and stared at Daniel's contact for a second. My thumb hovered over the call button. I could confront him directly. I could demand answers, push him until he slipped, until he admitted something. But then I thought about his face at the table, calm, controlled, completely prepared. No. Calling him would be a mistake. He wanted me emotional. He wanted me reacting. That's how he stayed in control. I slowly locked my phone again and set it aside. No more reacting, I whispered to myself. If I was going to get out of this, I had to think differently. I had to move differently. This wasn't about proving my innocence in one conversation. This was about uncovering the truth step by step. And that meant staying quiet. I shifted the car into gear and finally pulled away from the house. As it disappeared in my rearview mirror, I didn't feel the same pull to look back again. That chapter was closed, at least for now. What mattered was what came next. The streets were nearly empty, the night stretching out in front of me as I drove without a clear destination. My mind was already working, going over everything I knew and everything I needed to find out. First, the transaction. If the money was moved through an account connected to me, there had to be a digital trail. Transfers like that didn't just vanish. Banks kept records. Systems logged activity. Somewhere, there would be timestamps, IP addresses, authorization points details Daniel couldn't easily fake without leaving something behind. Then there were the messages. I remembered the conversation clearly, the urgency in his voice, the instructions. Whether it was a call, a message, or an email, something had to exist. Even if he deleted his side, there was a chance something remained on mine, or backed up somewhere I hadn't checked yet. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel slightly as my thoughts became more structured. This wasn't impossible, it just required patience. And patience was something Daniel probably didn't expect from me. By the time I reached my apartment, the initial shock of the night had settled into a steady determination. I parked the car, sat there for a second, and took a deep breath before stepping out. The quiet of my apartment felt different tonight. It wasn't comforting, but it wasn't heavy either. It was neutral, a place where I could think without interruption. I dropped my keys on the table and walked straight to my laptop without even turning on the lights. The glow of the screen filled the room as it powered on, and for the first time since leaving the house, I felt like I was doing something instead of just reacting. I opened my email first. Search bar. Daniel's name. Dozens of results appeared. Old conversations, business discussions, routine messages. I scrolled through them slowly, looking for anything related to the transaction. Anything that could connect him to it. Nothing obvious at first. But that didn't mean it wasn't there. I leaned back slightly, thinking. If he planned this carefully, he wouldn't leave something easy to find. He would have covered the obvious tracks, which meant I had to look deeper. Next, I checked my call history. The date of the transaction. The days before it. There were multiple calls between me and Daniel around that time. That matched my memory. But call logs alone weren't enough. I needed content. Proof of what was said. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself not to rush. This wasn't something I would solve in one night, and trying to do everything at once would only lead to mistakes. So I stopped. I closed my laptop for a moment and just sat there, letting the quiet settle again. This was bigger than I first thought. And if Daniel went to this level to set me up, then whatever he was hiding had to be even bigger. Which meant one thing. I had to be careful. Every move I made from now on mattered. Every step had to be deliberate. Because if he realized I was looking into this, he might try to cover whatever was left. Or worse, turn things even further against me. I opened my eyes again, a new clarity settling in. This wasn't about confronting him. Not yet. This was about building something solid, something undeniable. And that required time, silence, and control. I reached for my laptop again, this time with a calmer mindset. I wasn't just searching anymore. I was investigating. The first few days passed without any major breakthrough, but I didn't stop. I treated it like a routine wake-up, work my regular job, come home, and then spend hours digging through anything connected to the business. At first, it felt like I was searching in the dark, opening files and emails that led nowhere. But I knew this was part of the process. If Daniel had built this carefully, the truth wouldn't be sitting out in the open. What kept me going was the certainty I felt that night in my car, the way everything had lined up too perfectly against me. That kind of precision didn't happen by accident. It meant there were steps behind it, and steps always left traces. I started with the company's shared systems. I still had limited access to some archived data because my account hadn't been fully removed yet. That alone told me something. Daniel had rushed the accusation, but not the cleanup. Maybe he didn't think I'd fight back. Maybe he thought I'd just disappear. That was his second mistake. I went through old transaction logs first. Thousands of entries, most of them routine. Payments, transfers, vendor expenses, nothing unusual on the surface. But I wasn't looking for obvious anymore. I was looking for patterns. Late one night, after hours of staring at numbers, I noticed something small. A series of transfers just below the amount that would trigger internal review alerts. Individually, they looked harmless. Together, they added up to something much bigger. My heart rate picked up slightly as I pulled up more records connected to those transactions. Different dates, different accounts. But there was a rhythm to it. A consistency that didn't match normal business behavior. And then I saw it. Authorization tags linked to internal approvals. Not mine. Daniel's. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes scanning every detail again to make sure I wasn't misreading anything. The approvals were subtle, buried within layers of routine activity, but they were there. Digital signatures, timestamps, system logs, things that were much harder to fake without leaving inconsistencies. This doesn't just happen once, I whispered to myself. This had been going on for a long time. The $78,000 suddenly felt small in comparison. It wasn't the crime, it was the cover. I quickly started documenting everything: screenshots, file copies, timestamps. I created backups on external drives, cloud storage, even encrypted folders. If this information disappeared, I needed to make sure I still had access to it. Because now, this wasn't just about clearing my name. This was about exposing something much bigger. As the days turned into weeks, the picture became clearer. The same pattern kept repeating: money being moved in controlled amounts, routed through different channels, approved under Daniel's authority. Some of it led to accounts I didn't recognize. Others looped back into shell accounts connected to the business in ways that were deliberately confusing. It was smart, careful, and intentional. But no matter how careful someone was, repetition created vulnerability. The more he did it, the more traces he left behind. One evening, while reviewing older email archives, I found something that made my hands freeze for a second. An internal communication thread. At first glance, it looked like a normal discussion about financial adjustments. But as I read deeper, I noticed the tone. The language wasn't clear, it was coded. Vague references to shifting numbers and keeping things balanced. It didn't directly say anything illegal, but in the context of everything else I had found, it meant something very different. And Daniel was part of that thread, not just included, leading it. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen as everything started to connect. This wasn't a recent decision. This wasn't something he came up with overnight. He had been doing this for years, carefully, quietly, and when the risk of getting caught became too high, he needed someone to take the fall. Me. The realization settled heavily, but it didn't break me. If anything, it made me more focused, more certain that I was on the right path. I wasn't guessing anymore. I was uncovering. I continued digging, going deeper into backup files and system records that most people wouldn't even think to check. Hidden directories, archived logs, older versions of documents that hadn't been fully erased. Each new piece added another layer to the truth. And then came the final piece. A set of transfer confirmations tied directly to the $78,000. My breath slowed as I opened the file. The transaction path was there, clear, detailed, undeniable. It showed where the money originated, how it was moved, and where it ended up. And it didn't stop with me. There was a secondary authorization point. Daniel's credentials, not just implied, recorded. Time-stamped within seconds of my supposed action. Which meant one thing. He didn't just set me up after the fact. He was involved in the transaction itself. I stared at the screen, letting that sink in fully. This wasn't just evidence anymore. This was proof that connected him directly to the same money he accused me of stealing. Proof that his entire story was built on a lie. I saved the file immediately, backing it up in multiple places without hesitation. This was too important to risk losing. For the first time since that night, I allowed myself to feel something close to relief. Not because everything was over, but because I finally had something real, something solid, something he couldn't easily deny. I closed my laptop slowly, my mind already moving ahead. This wasn't the end. This was just the moment everything changed. Because now, I didn't just know the truth, I could prove it. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was scared, but because my mind wouldn't slow down. The evidence I had gathered wasn't just a collection of files anymore. It felt like a weapon. Something powerful enough to change everything, but only if used at the right moment. So I didn't rush. For days I stayed quiet. I went to work, answered messages, acted normal. No one around me suspected anything was different, but inside I was preparing. I reviewed every file again and again, making sure I understood exactly what I had. Every detail mattered. One mistake could give Daniel a chance to twist things again. By the time the next Thanksgiving approached, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. This time I wasn't invited, and that made all the difference. As I drove toward my parents' house, the familiar streets looked the same, but I felt completely different. Last time, I had walked in hoping to fix things. This time, I was going in with clarity. With purpose. With something they didn't expect from me anymore. Control. When I pulled up outside, I sat in the car for a moment, just like before. But this time, there was no hesitation. No doubt. Only focus. I stepped out, holding a small bag with my laptop inside. Nothing else. No emotional baggage, no expectations, just truth. The house looked exactly like it did before: warm lights, soft glow, that same illusion of a perfect family gathering. But I knew better now. That warmth was only on the surface. I walked up to the door and knocked. It didn't take long. When the door opened, Daniel was the one standing there again. But this time, his expression changed the moment he saw me. Not anger, surprise. For just a second. Then it disappeared. "Ava?" he said, as if he hadn't expected me to be here at all. "I thought I'd come by," I replied calmly. There was a slight pause before he stepped aside. "We weren't expecting you." "I know," I said, walking past him. Inside, the house was already set up for dinner. The same table. The same arrangement. But this time, I didn't feel small walking into it. I felt prepared. My parents looked just as surprised as Daniel had been, though they quickly tried to hide it. "You didn't say you were coming," my mother said. "I didn't want to interrupt anything," I replied simply. But that wasn't the real reason. I walked slowly toward the table, placing my bag down on a nearby chair. Every step felt deliberate, controlled. This wasn't going to be rushed. "Please sit," my father said, though his tone carried hesitation. I took a seat, noticing how everyone watched me closely. They were waiting. Maybe for an explanation. Maybe for an apology. Maybe for another argument. But I wasn't here for any of that. Dinner started quietly, just like last time. Small talk. Polite conversation. Careful smiles. But underneath it all there was tension. I could feel it. They remembered what happened before. They didn't know what to expect now. Daniel was watching me more than anyone else. Waiting. Trying to figure out what I was doing. And that was exactly what I wanted. I let the conversation continue for a few minutes. Let them relax just enough to believe this was normal. Then, without raising my voice, I reached for my bag and pulled out my laptop. That's when the room changed. The air tightened immediately. "What's that?" my father asked, his tone already serious. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I opened the laptop and turned it slightly so everyone could see the screen. "This," I said calmly, "is the truth." Daniel's posture shifted. Subtle, but noticeable. "About what?" he asked. I looked directly at him. "About the $78,000. A silence followed that felt heavier than anything before. I tapped a few keys and the first set of documents appeared on the screen. Transaction logs. Authorization records. Digital signatures. Everything I had spent weeks collecting. "This shows the full path of the money," I continued. "Where it came from, how it was moved, and where it ended up." My father leaned forward slightly, his eyes scanning the screen. My mother did the same. Even my sister looked confused, unsure of what she was seeing. Daniel, however, remained still. Too still. "And this," I said, bringing up the next file, "shows the authorization tied directly to your account." His expression tightened for just a moment. Not panic, just awareness. Because now he knew. I wasn't guessing anymore. I wasn't accusing. I was presenting. "This isn't possible," my father said slowly, though his voice lacked certainty. "It is," I replied. "And it's all backed by system records that cannot be easily altered." I turned the screen slightly again, showing a highlighted timestamp. This transaction happened at the exact same time as the one I was accused of making. My mother covered her mouth slightly, her eyes widening as she tried to process what she was seeing. My sister looked between me and Daniel, confusion written all over her face. "And Daniel?" He said nothing. He just watched, which told me everything I needed to know. I leaned back slightly in my chair, keeping my voice steady. "I didn't come here to argue," I said. "I came here to show you the truth." And for the first time since that night, I could feel the balance starting to shift. The moment the files appeared on the screen, the atmosphere in the room shifted completely. No one spoke. No one even moved at first. It was as if time had slowed down, forcing everyone to process what they were seeing. I could feel their eyes moving across the data, the logs, the signatures, the timestamps, each detail, pulling them further away from the version of reality they had accepted before. Daniel finally broke the silence, but not with panic. His voice was controlled, almost calm, like he was still trying to maintain his position. Ava, you can't just throw random data on a screen and expect us to believe it. I looked at him directly. It's not random. Every single file here is from the company's system. That doesn't mean anything, he replied. You could have manipulated this. I nodded slowly, as if I had expected that response. I knew you would say that. That got his attention. So I brought more, I continued. I clicked a few more times, opening a second set of files. These weren't just internal logs. These were backup records, system snapshots, and external confirmations. The kind of data that wasn't easy to fake because it came from multiple independent sources. These are mirrored logs, I explained, stored across different servers. If one system changes, the others don't match. And right now, they all match. My father leaned closer to the screen again, his expression tightening as he followed along. My mother stayed silent, her hands clasped together, clearly trying to understand what was happening. My sister looked completely overwhelmed. Daniel, however, started to shift slightly in his seat. For the first time that night, there was a crack, not visible to everyone else. But I saw it. You've been digging into this, he said, his tone sharper now. Yes, I replied calmly. After you threw me out over something I didn't do. His jaw tightened. You don't have the right to go through company systems like that, he added. I had the right the moment you accused me, I responded. And I used it to find the truth. I turned the laptop slightly toward my parents again, pointing to a highlighted section on the screen. This is where the money actually went. The room fell silent again. I watched their faces carefully as they read the details. Account numbers, transfers, routes that connected directly to internal approvals. But more importantly, the evidence didn't stop with me. It doesn't just point away from me, I said. It points directly to you. I looked at Daniel as I said that, and this time I didn't look away. The tension in the room became almost unbearable. That's impossible, my father said, his voice quieter now. No, I said. It's documented. I clicked again, bringing up another file. This shows repeated transactions over time. Not just one, multiple instances. Now I saw it. The realization starting to take hold. Not instantly, not all at once, but slowly. This isn't just about the $78,000, I continued. That's just the part you used to frame me. There's more. Daniel's breathing changed slightly, subtle, but noticeable. I brought up another set of data. This shows internal approvals tied to your credentials. Now the room went completely still. My father looked at Daniel, then back at the screen, then again at Daniel. Explain this, he said, his voice lower now. Daniel leaned forward slightly, but this time his confidence wasn't the same. This can be manipulated. No, I said immediately. Not like this. Not across multiple systems. He tried to respond, but something was different now. His usual control wasn't as strong. The narrative was slipping. And he knew it. Why would you do this? My mother asked suddenly, her voice shaking slightly. That question hung in the air. For a moment, no one spoke. Then I answered it myself. Because it's easier to blame one person than to explain a pattern. My sister looked at me, her expression conflicted. But why would he frame you? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at Daniel. Because that was the real question. Why me? Daniel leaned back, crossing his arms again, trying to regain control. This is ridiculous. You're trying to turn this around on me because you were caught. But something had changed. His tone wasn't as steady as before. There was something underneath it now. Defensive. Not calm. Not calculated. Defensive. And that mattered. Because the truth doesn't make people defensive like that. It makes them uncomfortable. I closed the laptop slightly, giving them a moment to process everything. Not because I was done, but because I wanted them to feel it, to really understand that this wasn't speculation. This was evidence, solid, documented, and undeniable. I didn't come here to fight, I said quietly. I came here to show you what really happened. My father looked between me and Daniel again, clearly struggling to reconcile what he had believed with what he was now seeing. This changes everything, he said slowly. Daniel didn't respond. And for the first time that night, I realized something important. The truth wasn't just being revealed. It was starting to break the story apart piece by piece. The room didn't explode the way I expected it to. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation, no sudden confession from Daniel. Instead, there was something far more uncomfortable: silence mixed with slow realization. The kind of silence that settles when people begin to understand that everything they believed might have been wrong. My father was the first to move. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes still fixed on the screen of my laptop, as if looking away might somehow undo what he had just seen. His face had changed. The certainty that once defined his decisions was gone, replaced by confusion and something that looked very close to regret. This can't be real, he said quietly, almost to himself. It is, I replied, keeping my voice steady. And it's only a small part of what I found. Daniel let out a short, controlled breath. You're overreacting, he said. But even as he said it, his voice didn't carry the same confidence as before. You're taking things out of context. I looked at him directly. Then explain the context. For a moment, he didn't respond. His eyes flickered slightly, just enough to show that he was thinking, calculating, searching for a way out. But this time, the usual confidence wasn't there to guide him. You hacked into internal systems, he said finally. That's what this is about. I access data that belongs to me as much as it belongs to you, I replied. And I didn't alter anything. I only collected what was already there. My mother's voice broke into the conversation, softer than before. But why would you do all of this, Daniel? That question hung in the air. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't accusing. It was just searching. Daniel turned slightly toward her, his expression shifting again. Because she's trying to turn this around, he said. She's always been dramatic. The word dramatic landed differently this time. Not as an insult, but as an attempt to dismiss everything I had presented. But it didn't work anymore. My sister, who had been quiet up until now, finally spoke again. This doesn't look like something she made up, she said, her voice uncertain but honest. There are too many details. Daniel glanced at her quickly. You don't understand how these systems work. I don't need to, she replied. I can see what's in front of me. That was the moment the balance started to shift completely. Because now it wasn't just me against Daniel. There was doubt in the room. Real doubt. My father rubbed his forehead, clearly overwhelmed. If this is true, he said slowly, then we need to involve proper authorities. Exactly, I said. Daniel's head snapped up slightly at that, and I noticed it immediately. The reaction, the smallest change. But enough. I agree, I added. Because if someone is responsible for manipulating financial records and setting someone else up, that needs to be investigated properly. Now Daniel's posture changed slightly. He leaned forward, his hands tightening together. You're making this worse than it needs to be, he said, his tone more controlled again, but now with a hint of pressure underneath it. No, I replied calmly. I'm making sure it doesn't stay hidden. There was a pause. A long one. Then my father spoke again, more firmly this time. If this is real, then we have to act on it. Daniel looked at him. And for a second, something passed between them. Not words. Not arguments. Something quieter. Understanding. And concern. Not for me, but for the consequences. Before you make any decisions, Daniel said carefully, You need to understand that this could damage everything. The business, the family, everything we've built. There it is, I said quietly. Everyone looked at me. What? My mother asked. That's the real argument, I explained. Not whether I did it or not. Not whether the evidence is valid. It's about what happens if the truth comes out. Silence followed again, this time heavier. Because now, they were starting to see it too. Daniel wasn't just defending himself. He was trying to control the outcome. My father looked at him with a different expression now. Not anger, but something closer to disappointment mixed with concern. Is there anything you want to say? He asked. That question was different. It wasn't an attack, it was a chance. But Daniel didn't take it. Instead, he leaned back slightly, crossing his arms again, trying to regain his composure. I've already said what needed to be said, he replied. But his voice wasn't as steady anymore. And that was important. Because now the story was no longer controlled by him. It was slipping. And I could feel it. I closed the laptop slowly, not because I was done, but because I didn't need to show more right now. They had seen enough. And now, they were thinking. Really thinking. Not reacting. Not defending. Just thinking. I'm not asking you to believe me blindly, I said, looking at all of them. I'm asking you to look at everything carefully and decide what makes sense. My father nodded slightly, his expression still tense. My mother remained quiet, but her eyes were no longer avoiding mine. My sister looked conflicted, but more open than before. And Daniel, he was watching me closely now. Not as a sister, but as someone he had miscalculated, because the truth wasn't just on the table anymore. It was taking control of the room. The next morning didn't feel like a continuation of the night before. It felt heavier, slower, and far more real. When I stepped out of the guest room, the house was already awake. But something had changed. The energy wasn't the same. It was no longer a place where decisions were made with certainty. It was a place where everything was being questioned. My father was sitting alone in the living room, holding a cup of coffee that had clearly gone cold. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. When he saw me, he didn't speak right away. Instead, he just nodded slightly, as if acknowledging that something important needed to be said but didn't know where to begin. Sit, he finally said. I sat across from him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he leaned forward, placing the cup down carefully. We've been talking, he said. All night. I nodded, waiting. I called our legal advisor, he continued. And we reviewed some of the information you showed. That was the moment everything shifted again. Not dramatically, but permanently. Is it verified? I asked. He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. It's concerning, he replied. There are inconsistencies that shouldn't be there. I didn't respond immediately. I just watched him. Because now, it wasn't about emotions anymore. It was about confirmation. At that moment, my mother entered the room. She looked exhausted, her eyes carrying the weight of a night filled with difficult conversations. My sister followed shortly after, standing near the doorway, unsure of where she fit into all of this. And then came Daniel. He walked in more slowly than before. No confidence. No immediate defense. Just presence. My father looked at him, then spoke carefully. We've decided to take this seriously. Daniel didn't react at first. He just stared back, waiting. We're going to conduct a formal investigation, my father continued. Everything will be reviewed independently. Now the room tightened again. But this time, the pressure wasn't on me. It was on the truth. Daniel exhaled slowly. You're making a mistake, he said. But there was something different in his voice now. Less control. More urgency. If this gets out, it will damage everything. My father didn't respond immediately, because now he was seeing something clearly. For the first time, the decision wasn't emotional, it was logical. If the truth damages everything, he said, then maybe what we built isn't as strong as we thought. That statement landed heavily. Even I felt it. Daniel's expression changed slightly. Just slightly. But enough. "You're choosing her over the family?" he asked. My father shook his head slowly. "I'm choosing the truth." That was the turning point. Not anger. Not shouting. Just truth. The kind that forces decisions to change. My mother walked closer to me, her eyes soft but conflicted. "Ava, I'm sorry," she said quietly. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't lumatic. It wasn't loud. But it meant everything. My sister followed. "We should have listened," she added. I didn't respond right away. Because this wasn't about apologies. Not anymore. This was about acknowledgement. And now it was happening. Daniel looked around the room, realizing something had shifted. Not just the situation, but the balance of power. "You're all making a mistake," he repeated. But this time, it sounded more like a warning than a statement. No one responded. Because no one needed to. The decision had already been made. "I didn't come here for revenge," I said quietly, finally breaking my silence. "I came here for the truth." And for the first time since this all began, I felt something shift inside me as well. Not satisfaction. Not victory. But closure. My father stood up slowly, placing a hand on my shoulder. "We'll handle this properly," he said. I nodded. Because now, it was no longer just my fight. It had become something bigger. Something that couldn't be ignored. Something that couldn't be controlled. And as I looked around the room, at the people who had once doubted me, something became clear. The story wasn't ending the way they expected. And neither was I. And that's where everything changed. From being accused and thrown out on Thanksgiving to finally exposing the truth. This journey wasn't easy at all. What started as pain turned into power, and what was meant to break me only made me stronger. But the real question is, what would you have done in my place? Would you have walked away, or stood your ground and fought for the truth? I hope this story made you think, feel, and question what you believe is right and wrong. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to *like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more powerful and emotional stories like this. Also, let me know in the comments, what country are you watching from? I love reading your responses. Until next time, stay strong, stay aware, and never let anyone silence your truth.